Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by NCSL. All lines have been placed in a listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Glenn Anderson. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks everybody for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Sharing the Sun, State Policies for Community Solar. My name is Glenn Anderson. I'm the Energy Program Director at NCSL, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. This webinar is the third in the Natural Resources Infrastructure Committee's 2018 Spring Webinar Series. We have two more webinars scheduled for June, which will explore rebuilding before and after a natural disaster and the latest in federal infrastructure funding. And for a complete schedule and registration details, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org. Today's webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will be able to access the recording of the webinar and the slides on our website. And we will send a notice shortly with a link to these resources. But in addition, you can access those resources immediately, being the slides that are being used today by our presenters, by clicking on the media icon, which basically looks like a piece of paper with a kind of a play icon upon it in the upper right-hand portion of your screen. So you can do that at any time and download those presentations. Also, I want to mention that our presenters will be able to answer your questions. So at any time during the presentation, please submit them by typing into the chat box in the lower left-hand side of your screen at any time. We will be holding a Q&A after our speakers finish presenting. So that will be at the end. We will be answering those questions. So I also wanted to introduce today's webinar, which is Community and Shared Solar Programs. It will be exploring this kind of rapidly expanding sector, which is spreading in numerous states across the nation. The webinar will explore community solar efforts, the opportunities and challenges they present, and discuss state policy options for creating effective shared solar programs. Our first presenter is Autumn Proudlove. She's the Senior Manager of Policy Research at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. She manages the center's energy policy research and analysis activities outside the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency, also called the DESIRE database. Autumn leads the team's quarterly policy tracking reports, the 50 states of solar, the 50 states of grid modernization, and the 50 states of electric vehicles, as well as the development of new policy research initiatives. So let's welcome Autumn.
Great, thank you so much, Glenn. I seem to keep getting knocked off of the web platform, so I don't have the ability to advance my slides right now. Oh, there we go, I think it's fixed. All right. So as Glenn said, I'm the Senior Manager of Policy Research at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. And I'm going to walk through some of the state community solar policy trends that we've been seeing based on our research. So first, just a little bit about the NC Clean Energy Technology Center. We're a public service center located within NC State University's College of Engineering. Our focus is on providing objective research, analysis, and technical assistance to industry stakeholders, so we don't do any sort of direct advocacy work. And one of our most well-known projects is the Database of State Incentives for Renewables and Efficiency, or DESIRE, which is a comprehensive online database of all of the federal, state, and utility policies and incentives for renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. Another policy project of ours, which I lead, is the 50 States of Solar. This is a quarterly report series that details all of the distributed solar policy and rate design changes that are under consideration across the country. We track several different types of solar policies in these reports, including community solar policies. And so we look at all regulatory actions, as well as any bills that have passed at least one chamber. This is a report that we do sell, but we offer complimentary copies for state legislators and regulators. So feel free to reach out to me if you fit into this category and would be interested in the report. So I'm going to talk about some recent state action in community solar policy and some of the trends that we've been observing based on this 50 States of Solar research. Currently, 19 states and DC have a statewide community solar enabling policy. So still less than half of the country has a community solar policy in place. But you can see that despite this, there are active utility-led community solar programs in most states right now. So a lot of utilities are taking the initiative on their own, absent any state directive to create these programs. In states where there is a policy in place, though, programs must meet certain state-established criteria. And these policies often allow entities other than utilities, often called third parties, to participate in the market and develop community solar projects when there otherwise isn't typically an opportunity for this. Last quarter, we found that 15 states took action related to community solar policies, either an open regulatory proceeding or a bill that had passed at least one chamber. And we found, interestingly, that state action on community solar policy has increased each year since we've been tracking this information starting in 2015. So we keep seeing really a lot of state-level activity on this topic. We're seeing states slowly but steadily adopting new community solar policies. Some of the most recent additions have been in New Jersey, in North Carolina, and in Virginia. And notably, all of these programs came about through legislative action. Several other states have been recently considering new policies or the expansion of existing policies as part of Louisiana's ongoing net metering proceeding. The commission staff there proposed allowing community net metering. A Connecticut bill would create a 300 megawatt community solar program. This bill did pass the Senate, but the state session has adjourned, so I think the bill might be dead at this point. A Virginia bill would create a community solar program that allows third parties to own and operate projects. Virginia does have a program, but it currently only allows utilities to administer these programs. So this would be an expansion of that. And this bill is being carried over to next year. A bill in Maryland would have made the state's pilot community solar program permanent. And a bill in Washington State would have created a community solar gardens program. Currently, Washington has a virtual net metering program. So these two bills did not advance before either state session ended. So we're really seeing a lot of state-level activity that's focused on both enabling community solar or expanding existing policies to create more options. So while you can say that there are 19 states that generally have a community solar policy in place, each policy really looks quite different. Some take the form of virtual net metering, while others are community solar gardens or shared renewables laws, and some are strictly utility-led programs. So virtual net metering generally allows multiple customers to receive credit from a single net metering facility. This is frequently seen in the northeastern states, and these projects are not going to be owned by the utilities since they're net metered projects. Community solar gardens or shared renewables type policies often allow both third parties and utilities to manage these community solar projects. But they establish a number of guidelines that everyone must follow. And then utility-led community solar programs do not allow third parties to develop and administer community solar projects. while a lot of individual community solar programs are run by utilities. This is definitely the least common approach for a statewide policy. So utilities in these states, such as North Carolina and Virginia, are able to propose community solar programs on their own, but having this type of a policy requires them to do so and requires the program to meet certain design criteria. And within these broad frameworks, there are a lot of different options when it comes to project and program design. So each state's community solar policy includes different program requirements, such as limits on individual project size and on total program capacity. Sometimes these types of requirements are included in legislation, and other times they're determined by the State Utilities Commission. So a good example here is New Jersey's community solar bill that was just enacted. The legislation includes a 5-megawatt limit on individual projects, but it directs the Board of Public Utilities to establish the program cap and the credit rate for participants. So here are a number of examples of different system size limits and program caps for different state programs. The system size limits typically range from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts, while the program caps tend to vary a lot more. Some of these are smaller pilot programs, while others allow for unlimited development. Another issue that we're seeing a lot of focus on is the credit rate for community solar participants. And in particular, we're seeing states consider some new approaches to credit rates for community solar. And this is really following the ongoing discussion of net metering credit rates across the country that you may also be following. So most state community solar programs have used retail rate compensation, but there's increasingly a push toward value of solar compensation. Some states use avoided cost rate compensation, but that approach will generally not provide any financial benefit to participating customers, which puts the success of the overall program at risk. So this has tended to be a less common approach, at least for the statewide programs. And typically for states with virtual net metering, any changes to the net metering credit rates themselves are also going to apply to the virtual projects. So for instance, Maine approved changes last year that gradually reduced credit rates, and Vermont implemented credit adjusters that either increase or decrease the credit rate based on the size of the system, where it's sited, and whether the renewable energy certificates are owned by the customer or by the utility. So these net metering credit rate changes are also applicable to community solar projects. For other types of statewide community solar programs, the credit rate is not necessarily tied to the net metering rate. It's either specified in statute or it's determined by the Utilities Commission. So here are some examples of different credit rates for community solar participants. You can see that states are taking a number of different approaches here. Notably, you can see that 3 states are utilizing or planning to utilize a value of solar rate. This type of rate can vary significantly based on what that value is determined to be. So this depends highly on the local system characteristics, what value components are included in that rate, and how they're calculated. And Hawaii is also taking an interesting approach. They're moving to time-varying credit rates for the second phase of their program. The second phase will also include an additional credit rate for community solar facilities that produce at least an average of 85% of their total monthly output during on-peak hours. So kind of an interesting twist there. Another major trend that we've been seeing is states actively working to increase opportunities for low-income customers to participate in these community solar programs. And states are using several different strategies to accomplish this. One approach has been to establish carve-outs within the community solar programs for low-income participants. Maryland's community solar rules, for example, which were adopted by their Public Service Commission, include a 60 megawatt carve-out for LMI customers. And the bill that was considered in Connecticut this year would have required at least 10% of total capacity to be sold to low and moderate income customers. Other states are providing incentives for low-income community solar projects, or something that I've seen come up lately in a few states, incentives for projects located in designated environmental justice areas. And generally, these incentives have the effect of lowering the cost of participation to these customers. Another approach has been to propose community solar projects as part of broader clean energy initiatives for low-income customers. In California, a community solar pilot project is being considered as part of a proceeding that's focused on developing alternative energy options for disadvantaged communities in a particular area of the state. And in New Hampshire, the Public Utilities Commission issued a major order on net metering last year, which initiated several different pilot programs to gain information and test some new strategies. And one of these focuses on projects to benefit low and moderate income customers. So the Commission issued an order just last quarter which allows community solar projects that benefit low and moderate income customers to participate in this broader pilot program. And some other approaches that we've seen include ensuring low-income housing providers can participate in these community solar programs, providing financing options, and developing outreach and education plans that are aimed at low-income customers. So a few takeaways here. I think we're very likely to continue seeing states adopt new community solar policies, and this is almost always through legislation. While the program details are typically worked out in a regulatory proceeding, the legislative language is important. It can really play a large role in the program's ultimate success. We expect to continue seeing a focus on participant credit rates, especially as net metering credit discussions continue across the country. There seems to be growing movement toward value of solar compensation, especially for these community solar projects. So I think we're going to continue seeing a lot of interest in that approach. And lastly, I think that we're going to see more states consider legislative language that specifically relates to encouraging low-income participation, whether this be through carve-outs or incentives or some of these other approaches. And so with that, I will thank you for your time and turn it over to Maida.
Thank you, Autumn. Thanks so much for an excellent overview of the state policy trends in this area. So yeah, our second speaker today is Maida Surampudi, and she is a research associate at the Smart Electric Power Alliance. Her research areas include distributed energy resource deployment, utility customer programs, and electric vehicles. Maida, it's great to have you with us, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to Autumn and to NCSL. I'm trying to get my mouse to work now. Okay, so yeah, as Glenn said, my name is Maida Surampudi, and I'm on the research team here at SEPA. I work with our solar, energy storage, demand response, and electric vehicle data. Additionally, I'm responsible for our data validation efforts for our annual utility survey, and I work with utilities to make sure that the deployment numbers we get for distributed energy are correct. I'm currently working on our solar market snapshot, which should be released in the next few weeks, so you should look out for that. Before I start, I want to give a brief overview of SEPA. We're the Smart Electric Power Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to working with electric power stakeholders on the most pressing issues affecting the growth and utilization of smart and clean energy. We're a trusted platform for education, research, and collaboration, and we help utilities, customers, and other players deploy and integrate solar, storage, demand response, and other DERs. The data that I'm going to talk about today comes primarily from 2 recent papers that we released this past year. One is our Community Solar Program Design Models paper, and the other is our Financing Community-Based Solar Projects paper. Both of these papers are available at sepapower.org if you're interested in downloading and kind of getting into more of the details. And our community solar research is partially funded through a Solar Market Pathways grant from the DOE's Solar Energy Technologies Office. Okay, so let's get into the data. So through our research, we found that 228 utilities in 36 states have community solar programs as of the end of 2017. And so we found enabling policies in 17 states, and I know that Autumn said there are 19 states with these policies, so our data is tracked through the end of 2017. So we found 17 states plus DC with enabling policies and 19 without enabling policies that still had community solar programs. And so what we're seeing here is that community solar programs are appearing in non-traditional markets, and that community solar is a product for everyone. However, community solar projects are mostly appearing in states with policies, and that's where we're seeing the biggest markets. And the most active market that we tracked is in Minnesota, which Carrie will talk about next. About half the community solar capacity in the U.S. is in Minnesota. So we've also been seeing a very steady growth in community solar capacity. The total capacity for community solar was 734 megawatts, with 387 megawatts installed in 2017 alone. So last year, community solar saw 112% growth in capacity over 2016, as compared to the total solar market in the U.S., which sees an average growth of about 68% a year for the last 10 years. So even though community solar is growing quickly, it is still a small percentage of total solar capacity. In 2017, community solar was about 4% of new installed solar capacity, and NREL estimates that community solar is about 1% of total cumulative installed solar capacity. So there's a lot of room for growth, and customers in about 90% of utility service territories do not currently have access to community solar programs, and about 33 states do not have shared solar enabling policies. So we are seeing, though, that there's great potential for community solar growth with declining solar costs, customer demand, and these new policies. Community solar benefits all parties involved. For customers, some of the benefits or some of the reasons for increase in community solar capacity is interest in solar programs, and that community solar offers them a way to reduce their own risk and avoid having to install their own panels. Utilities see community solar as a way to engage with customers, defer upgrades to transmission and distribution equipment, and to extend the life of that equipment. And developers are interested in diversifying their portfolios. So what we are looking at here is how the community solar programs are broken out. What we can see is that the third-party administered programs make up the majority of community solar programs. Third-party administered programs are responsible for 495 megawatts, or about 67% of total installed capacity. And utility-administered programs are responsible for about 239 megawatts. But this graphic also shows something interesting. It shows that, especially in utility-administered programs, co-ops are taking the lead out of utilities. So the gray area is those represent community solar programs at co-ops. About 160 co-ops have a program, which far exceeds the number of programs available through investor-owned and public power utilities. but most programs are pretty small. About 30% have a total generating capacity over 1 megawatt. And in this graphic, each rectangle represents one program, and the relative size of that rectangle equals the relative capacity of the program. Additionally, in our research, we found that third-party administered programs subscribed a majority of capacity to commercial customers, while utility-administered programs subscribed a majority of capacity to residential customers, and that's the graphic on the left. And that's an interesting takeaway because most of these third-party administered programs are in states with enabling policies. So while we are seeing a lot of community solar programs in these states, a lot of these subscribers are commercial customers and not necessarily residential customers. The graphic on the right shows that size of the program is correlated to the split of residential and commercial subscribers. In programs with under 1 megawatt of total capacity, a majority of subscribers, or 91%, were residential customers. However, in larger programs with more than 1 megawatt of total capacity, only 34% of subscribers were residential customers, with the majority being commercial customers. And one of the reasons behind this is many of these smaller programs are located in service territories of rural cooperatives who have a greater percentage of residential meters than the rest of the industry. One of the other things that we looked at in our study is the program subscription rates. The average program has 83% of its capacity subscribed, but we were interested in seeing how we could look at the programs, and we tested a few different hypotheses here. We analyzed subscription rates in 5 different types of programs, or through 5 different lenses, and we found the greatest difference in program subscription rates was when comparing programs with different financial benefits for the subscribers. So programs promising immediate bill savings almost universally garnered a full subscription, and programs that provide either a hedge against potential rate hikes or pay back the upfront payment after a set period experience lower subscription rates. The marketing budget also seemed to have an effect on the subscription rate, with programs spending above 5% experiencing higher subscription than those spending less. We found that capacity, administrator, and launch here didn't really play an effect. Also, I'm looking at this and it looks like the graphic has been kind of condensed, so for anyone who's interested, I can send this out so you can read more clearly what is going on behind these numbers. This final slide is basically just the things that we're hearing from our members, and there's a great overlap with what Autumn talked about. Our members are interested in low-income customers and how to provide access to solar to them, interested in balancing the risk between utility and customer, how to create billing, how to do the billing for community solar programs, citing land use requirement, as well as making sure that residential and corporate customers get access to community solar projects. And so here's our contact information here at SEPA. Again, my name is Maida Surampudi, and I work with Dan Schwastik on the community solar data. So thank you, Glenn, and I will pass it over to Carrie now.
Thanks, Maida. And I just want to remind our participants or viewers that you can ask questions of our presenters, any that you may have. Enter them, please, in the chat box in the lower left-hand side, and we will get to those after our final presentation. So our final presentation or presenter is Carrie Clem, who oversees the implementation of Xcel Energy's renewable choice programs across 7 states, including the nation's largest community solar program, private solar interconnection options, and green pricing programs like WindSource, and Xcel Energy's latest innovation in renewable choice programs called Renewable Connect. Her team also oversees the company's time of use and demand-based rate pilots for residential customers. So let's welcome Carrie.
Thank you. As you mentioned, I'm Carrie Clem, and I oversee the implementation of Xcel Energy's renewable choice programs. That takes up easily 90% of every day. And we have a pretty robust portfolio of community solar programs. We have the Minnesota program, which I'll focus on here. We have a program in Colorado, which was one of the first community solar programs, and it runs under a little bit of a different model. And so if you have questions about that, I can field those as well. And then we also run community solar in Wisconsin, where it's one of those utility-run programs where it's structured so that all of the costs of the program are recovered through the subscription rates. And so I have experience in that realm as well. So keep that in mind if you have questions as we proceed. To give you a quick overview of what community solar looks like in Minnesota, it allows our customers to support community solar gardens and get paid for their solar production without having to have it on site and deal with the installation and comparing bids and working on the maintenance over time. The program launched in December of 2014 following 2013 legislation here in Minnesota. And within a couple weeks, we had over 1,500 solar garden applications. And that exceeded, I think, what anyone thought they were going to get from the program. And so we worked with the PUC to clarify some of the program rules. And that took place over the summer of 2015. And out of those decisions became some limitations around some of the things that we saw, where the legislation was being interpreted in different ways, which led to a very large, very expensive program, potentially for all of our customers to have to support. And so we worked through a collaborative process, actually, with the solar community to come up with some short-term and long-term resolutions to some of the issues they were facing. And that led to, in 2016, we ended up re-looking at those applications after a lot of the large co-location had been resolved. Just to give you a clue of what co-location looked like, the legislation limited the garden size to 1 megawatt, and a lot of people saw opportunity in choosing a large area of land and co-locating 1 megawatt gardens all right next to each other. Some of the sites went up to 50 megawatts. So we worked to resolve some of that and limit co-location to 5 megawatts for projects that were received by mid-September 2016, and then to withdraw the rest of those large sites that really didn't have the same look and feel that we and some others had envisioned for community solar. And so once we did that, we went through an extensive interconnection study. And keep in mind that at this point in time, everyone still was uncertain about the future of the investment tax credit for solar. And so everyone was gunning to get everything done by the end of 2016 so that they could get that ITC credit. And that ended up getting extended, which took the foot off the gas and has led to some different issues that we've run into along the way that I'll talk about a little bit as well. So in January of 2017, that was the point after which gardens switched to a value of solar bill credit, and I'll talk a little more about that. And as of today, June 1st, 2018, we have 105 active community solar gardens, 364 megawatts, which is even a little bigger than we had discussed, or than was discussed by the other panelists, and we have over 8,000 subscribers. Just giving a quick overview of what the legislation looked like that enabled community solar in Minnesota. The gardens have to be interconnected directly to the electric distribution system. This has been interesting in the field because when developers go out and select locations, they can't always tell by looking at a substation if it's a transmission substation or a distribution substation. So sometimes people think that they're locating adjacent to a substation that they can interconnect to, when actually the substation that they'd interconnect to is miles and miles away. So that's a key component that, that drives how the program is delivered. The gardens have to be located in our Minnesota service area, and they can be sized up to 1 megawatt. They provide renewable system energy to all Xcel Energy customers. So that's a key component. It's not a direct offset of energy use for subscribers. The energy goes to the grid and is used for all customers. Likewise, the renewable energy credits, or RECs, go to Xcel Energy for compliance with our state energy standards. The gardens can receive other incentives. So if they're of a size so as to qualify for our private solar incentives, they can receive that and still be a community solar garden. I think we only have one project that's done that so far, but it is an option. There are no low-income requirements for the program, which is different than our program in Colorado, where we've had carve-outs and low-income RFP so as to enable low-income participation. There is no cap on the program, which is also different than our Colorado program, where there's a certain limited amount of capacity available each year that's awarded through an RFP process. In Minnesota, there is no program cap. The legislation does allow for recovery of interconnection costs by the utility, and it dictates the bill credit rate, which started out as an applicable retail rate bill credit and then transitioned to the value of solar. Some language that was included in the legislation that led to a lot of changes for the program and a lot of the considerations that were made was a requirement that the program reasonably allow for the creation, financing, and accessibility of community solar gardens. And that, as you can imagine, is a pretty broad statement that gets applied in a number of ways because reasonably is defined differently depending on who you are. And so that just has created some uncertainty as people go through, and so things have gone to the Public Utilities Commission for clarification as we've gone through this process. And wherever we can, we work with the solar developers so as to enable their success. But if it gets to be something that gets really outside of our standards or our norms or starts to get to be really expensive for all of our customers to pay for, those are the things that really bubble up. One of our key requirements as we run this program is to make sure that we are administering the tariff and following the legislation, and really throughout our business practices being transparent and consistent and fair, so that all of the solar gardens who are competing with each other for customers and for business and for land and for projects, so that they all have the same possibility of success.
I do.
So the way that community solar works in Minnesota, I'm just going to go through this really quickly in case you're not as familiar. There's really three parties. Four parties. There are the subscribers, the community solar garden operators or developers, Xcel Energy, and all of our customers. So the subscribers pay the community solar garden for their subscription. The solar garden produces energy, and that solar energy and the renewable energy credits go through Xcel Energy to all customers who benefit from them. All customers pay for the bill credits through our fuel clause, and then Xcel Energy delivers the bill credits to the subscribers. So that's how the cycle of money works. There's a lot of policy and operational issues that come into play as you try to implement a program like this, and we've learned a lot every step of the way. I'm going to focus in on a few of these as we go through the rest of the presentation, but at the end of my materials, there's a lot of reference material that I included, and you can go in and look at it, and a lot of this is explained more there. Or you can reach out to me. I've included contact information if you have questions and want to talk about any of these specific operational or policy issues and what they look like in real life as we've gone through them in Minnesota. So really quickly, touching on bill credit rates. Bill credit rates matter because this is the financial benefit of subscribing to a solar garden. And a lot of people have contracts with solar garden providers that enable them to see day one savings with no money down and no equipment on site to maintain or take care of. So depending on the contract and how it's structured, which varies a lot from garden to garden and is not something that we as a utility are a party to, it can save money day one and not have a lot of financial risk. Others have escalators that build the potential savings for the subscriber on utility rate increases. And some of them use models that go up to 5%, which is quite a bit lower than we've seen either historically over the last 15 years or especially over the 4 years where we've actually gone down in that time period. And so we always tell people, get multiple bids, compare offers, vet your suppliers, and make sure that you're really comfortable with what you're signing up for and you fully understand it. Just to give you a little look at the difference in bill credit rates, I'm going to point here. So these are the applicable retail rate. And the way that this works is if your garden was approved in the interconnection queue, before 2017, you qualified for the applicable retail rate bill credit. And this is just what it sounds like. It's meant to kind of mirror the retail rate. And then the enhanced that you see here include the REC, because the REC wasn't contemplated in the applicable retail rate creation or definition. And so it ranged up to 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And our retail rates are, all in applicable retail rate is more like 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour for that same time period. And so you can see how that becomes pretty lucrative for the subscribers. And then for business customers, they saw similar levels of applicable retail rate compared to their standard per kWh rate. And that has since been replaced by the value of solar. So the value of solar is interesting in that it takes the year one value of solar according to a formula that was developed by our Department of Commerce, and then it adds a accelerator to it. And so every year it goes up according to the prior year's consumer price index, I believe. And so it ranges over the 25-year life of the garden. And so, for example, in 27 gardens, it was 10.3 cents per kilowatt hour, and it ranges up to 17.9 cents in year 25. And then likewise, in 2018, it went down just a little bit, and you can see how the escalator works there and the value of credit or value of solar. One of the challenges of this is for subscribers who are looking at subscribing to a community solar garden, they need to make sure that they understand their vintage and what bill credit structure they're under and what the 25-year outcome looks like. The nice thing about the value of solar set up this way is it takes away some of the risk of estimating what utility price changes are for the subscriber as they're looking at their contract, because oftentimes the subscription price is set, but with the applicable retail rate, what that annual bill credit rate is changes every year. And so there's a little bit of risk built in there, as opposed to the value of solar takes away some of that risk. One of the things that we're concerned about is the non-participant cost. And just to give you a little snapshot of what this looks like for community solar gardens in Minnesota, universal solar costs are less than half of community solar costs when you look at it per kWh price paid for the energy produced. And the value of solar kind of falls in the middle of that and is the same no matter what your customer class is. So one of the things to just take into consideration is how does the cost of solar energy that's being purchased compare to what your goals and expectations are for a program that you might be developing. Another interesting trend that we've noticed is with subscribers. So we do have a requirement that subscribers be located in the same or an adjacent county, trying to keep that community in community solar so that it's something where, if they wanted to, they could drive by and go see it, or they could see it active in their community. We do have a couple of rooftop gardens that are located in the metro area or in the community, and that's kind of a nice model. For example, where a church has a rooftop solar facility and a lot of the subscribers come from within their congregation. The subscribers are paid for solar energy produced through an on-bill credit, and one subscriber can take up to 40% of a single garden. You can subscribe to multiple gardens. So example, if you are a large manufacturing facility, you could subscribe to 20 solar gardens, up to 40% of each, to have your subscriptions accommodate all of your energy use. there's a maximum subscription of 120% of energy use across all gardens, and there is very low-income participation in our program today. Looking at our current subscribers, we have about 8,000. You can see that the majority of them are residential. However, when you look at the capacity of the program and what's available today, the majority of the capacity is taken up by commercial subscriptions. And likewise, of the $7 million that we paid out in bill credits in April, the majority of those went to commercial and industrial customers. So this just gives you a holistic snapshot of what's coming in addition to the 364 megawatts that we currently have online. You can see that we currently have scheduled in-service dates for about 200 more megawatts coming online through the end of the year. Now, I can guarantee you that won't all happen, but we build out as people set their dates to meet their needs. And there's a very strong likelihood, even if some of these shift in time into 2019, that they will come online. We do have a 24-month requirement to bring your garden online. And so some people are starting to come up against those deadlines, and that's leading to some challenges for them as they're trying to finalize the financing for their solar gardens when they have a firm deadline. We have created a contract amendment to allow them to show substantial progress and continue with the garden without pulling it out of the program with a day-for-day penalty that's then credited back to our fuel clause. So I put in some more reference, and you can get a lot of information. As you can imagine, with an uncapped program with lucrative bill credits and lots of competitive players going on in the market, there's been a very active PUC docket on this. So I included the docket number, the legislation that you can look it up if you're interested. We have a lot of information for customers and developers on our web pages. And the Section 9 tariff actually is very detailed in how it lays out the logistics of how the program works. And so those are some good resources if you have questions, or you can always reach out to me as well. And with that, I'll turn it back for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Carrie. We appreciate your detailed overview of that the program that Xcel has been implementing. And we now do have some time for questions for our presenters. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to enter those in the chat box. We do have a few we can start with here. So I guess the first question here is how you explain utility-owned community solar and how that can also be cooperative. I think what they're getting at is, you know, setting pricing and tariffs, and whether there's what sort of rate of return there might be on that, and how that really works if it's still called community or shared solar.
Do you want me to answer that? I can't tell you the question is for. Okay. I'll take a stab at it. This is Carrie from Xcel. And so, for example, we have a utility-owned community solar garden in Colorado where we sell the subscriptions to our customers, and it's a shared solar facility, and then they are credited through a fuel credit for offsetting their energy use with the energy provided by the community solar garden. So in that circumstance, the REC actually goes to the subscriber, and they jointly own subscriptions to the community solar garden, and they actually pay up front for those subscriptions. So I don't know if that fully answers the question from like a cooperative standpoint, like a cooperative power entity, but from our perspective, that's what our utility-owned community solar garden looks like.
Great, and perhaps, Maida, you could expand on kind of the comparison between utility and third-party owned and how those might vary with regards to setting pricing and tariffs, and whether they are similar or how they may differ.
Yeah, so I think with co-op programs or co-op utility programs, which is how I understood the question to be, but maybe I misunderstood, what we see is a higher subscription of residential customers and subscribers. Now, specifically regarding tariffs, I don't know the exact answer, but I'm happy to take the contact information for the person who asked and get back to them. I think Dan Schwastik, my colleague, would be able to better answer that.
Okay, great, thanks. And we have another question. Who actually is in ownership of the land where these are built? And I guess that obviously could vary depending on what type of community solar project it is and who owns it. But also, I think following up on that, somewhat related, is there locational decisions that are being made by utilities that's become a very topical issue as of late with regards to where to place these, since that location can really determine how valuable the solar installation could be to the system with regards to lowering distribution costs or potentially increasing them depending on whether that portion of the grid is overloaded already or whether they're trying to deal with reducing the need to build transmission. There's so many different, I guess, issues involved there. If you have any comments on that topic as well.
So this is Carrie, and I'll jump in based on what we've seen, especially in Minnesota, where we've had so much activity. It's all kind of related as a question, so it's interesting that those came in together. The land is typically owned, and again, remember that these are third-party developers, so we don't always have insight into all of this, but from what I've heard, it's either leased typically from farmers, sometimes from brownfields, but those are pretty rare. And then it is also sometimes purchased by the solar company so that they own the land. So I think there's probably both models that are in play. One of the things that I've noticed, and we've noticed as a whole, is that a lot of the capacity has been built out on the fringes of our service territory where land is most accessible and cheap. And especially in the counties that surround the Twin Cities metro area. If you go out one county from there, that tends to be where we've seen the most activity and the most congestion in the interconnection requests within the distribution system. The cost for building out the interconnection system to accommodate the community solar gardens is paid for by the garden that causes the cost to be incurred. In some cases, we've had solar garden queues up to 10, 12 on a single distribution substation. And so those deep queues mean that at some point we tend to run out of capacity available for additional solar installations. Our tariff does have a material upgrade limitation. That's one of those things that we worked out through working with the community solar garden developers as we worked through different concessions. And what that really meant is that we weren't going to spend more than $1 million to upgrade the distribution system and do reconductoring so as to allow these gardens to exist without interfering with the normal operations of the distribution system. So I think I answered at least a couple of those questions there.
This is Autumn. I'll jump in there as well and point out the example of New York, where their credit rate is based on a value of solar rate, and one of those value components is a locational system relief value. So you're getting a little bit of an extra financial incentive if you do locate that system in a place where it provides those sort of grid benefits.
Thanks. And
we
have another
are
question.
Looking at locational adders as well. So it's being evaluated in Minnesota.
Sure. And we have another quick question before we have another one I want to get to before we end here. But if you could maybe quickly, I guess this is for Carrie, quickly answer how Excel is looking at co-locating multiple solar gardens and interconnection placement. You sort of touched on that in your last answer, but if you had any further thoughts on that.
I do have a slide or two on co-location further on in the presentation that they can look through once the materials are sent. But I can say we look at kind of a preponderance of evidence, and the tariff co-location criteria kind of mirror the tax language, which is common ownership, umbrella sales arrangements, shared interconnection, revenue sharing agreements, and so on. And then in addition, we look at proximity to other sites and how much did they collaborate in the development. For example, were there shared development plans? Are they on the same plot of land? Do they have common land use agreements? Things like that really show high levels of collaboration throughout the development process. And then when we see something that we're not quite sure how to deal with it, it looks co-located to us, then we give them a notice and they're able to provide additional evidence to us. And then it goes to our Department of Commerce for consideration and they make a ruling on whether it's co-located.
Thank you so much. We have one final question, and this is for all of the presenters. Are there any key components you feel, there's a lot of policymakers on the call that may be considering legislation related to community solar, and is there key components you feel that should be considered as policymakers are looking to create effective legislation going forwards, or challenges that should be addressed?
Yeah, this is Maida from SEPA, and I think one important takeaway, at least from our research, is that in states with policies, we're seeing a lot of third-party development, and the subscribers to these are largely corporate customers. So if legislators are interested in increasing residential access to community solar programs, that should be factored in.
This is Autumn. I think I would highlight the credit rate issue. A lot of the participation decisions, I think, are ultimately going to come down to whether the customers are receiving a financial benefit or not. So that credit rate is key to encouraging participation.
And this is Carrie, and having spent the last 3 years of my life deep in this, I would say just being aware of how all of the issues interplay and thinking through what is your goal for the program and trying to find a good balance between customer choice for all customers and then how much it costs all non-participating customers who have to pay for that above market rate solar energy that's being produced, and how does that all fit into your long-term goals and ideals for community solar where you're working. I think just knowing that every decision impacts everything else is really important, and that the solar community also needs a high level of certainty in order to enable successful financing. And so the more that you can define things in a reasonable way that creates a balance, the better off everyone will be if there's clarity that they can count on. Because whenever there's not clarity, then they have a harder time getting the financing.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your answers, and I want to extend a final thanks to you, Autumn, Maida, and Carrie. We really appreciate the time you've taken to share your expertise and knowledge with us. And thanks to all of you attendees for participating in today's webinar. And as a reminder, a recording of the webinar and presentation slides will be made available shortly, and we will send you an email reminder. Our next webinar will be on June 14th, where we'll be exploring state-federal collaboration to build disaster resiliency. Please visit ncsl.org to register. So thank you and have a fantastic day.